you have written in this book the possibility that some of the trumpets have already sounded.
Yes.
Can you explain why you believe that?
Let me give one astounding illustration, and I've got several in here. Now, I want to preface by saying everything I'm going to say, and especially when I get to the punchline of it, and you'll know when the punchline, because everybody will go, what? I didn't know that was there. Everything that I'm going to say is documented profusely with credible document. I'm talking about language study departments of major universities, talking about UN, United Nations documents, transcripts, talking about scientific sites, geographical sites, military sites, historical sites. I'm not talking about conspiracy theory websites. I'm talking about with impeccable sources. So let me just go ahead now and say this. I believe the seventh trumpet is the rapture of the church, and there's a lot of reasons why. But let's just pretend like for a moment that that's correct. Well, that means the first six trumpets are going to sound, they're going to be revealed. These major monumental things are going to happen sometime before the rapture of the church. So let's back up and look at the sixth trumpet very quickly. The sixth trumpet says, in effect, that there's going to be a major Middle Eastern war on the scope of perhaps a World War III. The Pope just a few weeks ago said, we're on the verge of World War III. A Ukrainian ambassador said just a few weeks ago, we're on the verge of World War III. A prominent Muslim cleric in Pakistan said, we're on the verge of World War III. And they're all referring to what's happening now in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And so Trumpet 6 says that on the Euphrates River, this war is going to break out. It says as many as 200 million people could be involved. Well, there's 400 million Muslims in the Middle East. If you start adding American troops, maybe Russian troops, maybe Chinese troops, maybe European troops, plus 400 million Muslims, I mean, it could easily be 200 million people fighting over there. Israel is surrounded. And then it says that there are 4 angels there holding this back to a certain day. So there's something very spiritual about this war. This is not going to be fought over oil per se or over geographical territory per se, but there's something very spiritual about it. That's Trumpet 6. Many people believe that we're looking at perhaps the build-up to that right now. So if Trumpet 6 is some kind of a big war in the Middle East, by the way, it says it'll take place on the Euphrates River. You know the Euphrates River begins in northern Turkey, slides down through Syria, slides down through Iraq into the Persian Gulf. So that's the heartbeat of where we're at now, where ISIL is, where everything is taking place right now. So people are looking at that. But now watch. I have documented in my book from military sites and historical sites and mainstream media where many analysts, expert analysts say that where we are right now ties back in our most recent history to the first Gulf War. Now follow me. This is what they say, and I've got this documented. The first Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, he was in Kuwait for 5 months before the American coalition troops went in. He set 800 oil wells on fire that burned for 11 months, darkened the sky as black as midnight in the noonday for months and months, had torture camps, killing people, torturing people, all of this horrendous stuff, caused this multinational troops to come over, had this big war in the Middle East. Watch. After that was over, very quickly, the next thing that happened 10 years later, 9/11, okay? 24 years, I meant, yeah. Gulf War, 10 years later, 9/11. Osama bin Laden said that one of the reasons they did 9/11 was because of us being in the Middle East, because we were on Saudi soil with our military, we invaded Iraq, and so 9/11 was payback for that. So what was our response? We went to Iraq, we went to Afghanistan, we were there for many, many years. The next thing that happens is the current administration comes to office in the White House. The next thing that happens is Arab Spring, Egypt falls, Libya falls. Then the next thing that blows up out of that, and my contacts in Israel were telling me when all of that was happening, we're going to have major terrorist organizations rise up out of this, and Israel's going to be surrounded by enemies. Now we have ISIS and ISIL. So the point being, first Gulf War to where we are now to the possibility of a World War III. Now watch. If Trumpet 7 is the rapture of the church, if Trumpet 6 is this major Middle Eastern war, then back up to Trumpet 5. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm just going to paraphrase. Trumpet 5 says, the messenger says, that something happens to a people for 5 months. It says that. in Revelation 9. It says twice, for 5 months something happens, and the sky, the pit is opened, and black smoke and fire fills the sky and blocks out the sun. The locusts come out of the smoke. Then you described them, helicopters, tanks across. Can you imagine the thousands of tanks and helicopters? Then it says people were longing to die, but they couldn't. Here's the punchline. And it ends, trumpet 5, which leads to trumpet 6, ends by saying, and the name of the messenger that started all of this, his name, and see, whenever you see the name is, watch this, his name is Apollyon or Abaddon. Apollyon is Greek, Abaddon is Hebrew. It translates into English as the destroyer. If you translated that to Persian, you know what the word for the destroyer is? Saddam. Saddam. And that's from the Harvard University Persian Language Institute, and I've got all kinds of other references in my book right out of the Middle East, Middle Eastern people saying, no, that's what it means. And by the way, Saddam was not his name. That was a nickname given to him by his mother. She called him the little destroyer, and it stuck with him all of his life. And trumpet 5 says, something's going to happen for 5 months.
Wow.
It's going to darken the sky. Smoke is going to come out of a bottomless pit. That's amazing because the word for pit in Greek is P-H-R-E-A-R, freer. And the first definition in Greek is a well.
Oil well.
Not
Oh,
oil,
I'm
but
sorry.
well. A well.
Yeah.
A well, but a
I was just thinking,
yeah,
I just thought
oil
oil
wells.
well.
800 oil.
That's why it was on fire. 800
oil freers on fire, blackening the sky. The helicopters and tanks are over there. People are, and that scripture, there's that scripture in there that says, and in those days, people will long to die, but they can't. And so for thousands of years, people looked at that and said, what does that mean? Is there going to be some kind of technology in the last days where people want to die, they'll live forever? No, I think it means as simply as what it says. My book documents that after the Gulf War was over, and after Saddam Hussein was finally caught and hung, we now have documentation that the whole time Saddam Hussein was in there, he had death camps and torture camps where he had thousands, this is heartbreaking, thousands of children that he was doing brutal, I'm going to give you the PG version, brutal things to, and he was purposely not allowing them to die. He was keeping them alive so their parents could hear them screaming for years. And then he took adults and did the same thing. He had dungeons and torture chambers where he would keep people alive and they wanted to die. I'm reading this scripture and I could be wrong. I could be totally have missed it, but how do you miss 5 months, smoke is sky out of a bottomless pit, the sky is darkened, the locusts come out of it, people want to die but they can't, and by the way, the guy that does all this, his name is Saddam.
Wow.
Now, I got to say this, Pastor Jim. I said one time before, I might have been on our last show that we did, but I said there was a burden that John carried. And Paul, because Paul saw all of this before John did. Paul said he was caught up to paradise.
Sure.
And then he spoke about trumpets and rapture and the Antichrist. So he was a prophet to the church for years, for decades, before John ever had his revelation. But those two men carried a burden, folks, because they were thrust into our lifetime. And they knew 2,000 years ago that Jesus wasn't coming for 2,000 more years.
Oh, boy.
So how do you keep the church encouraged and motivated and moving forward when you've been given the burden of seeing the end and knowing what's going to happen and seeing what's going to happen and knowing it's not going to happen in your lifetime? So you know what they did? They spoke truth, but they spoke in sweeping terms and in symbolic terms. But every now and then in the book of Revelation, I'm convinced it was peppered with clues, codes that would be for the seal it up, Daniel, until the time of the end. What if Trumpet 5 was all about Saddam Hussein and the Gulf War that leads to everything we are now? Nobody could have known that until it happened.
That's right.
So for 2,000 years, everybody who tried to interpret that would have been wrong, if that's what it is.
Right.
So I think that they carried that burden because they had to know this, but what they did, the Spirit said, now listen, John, write this down. It won't mean anything to anybody. It'll mean some symbolic things, But the name of the person that starts all this, his name is, and if it was given in Persian, Saddam. Now write this down. Apollyon, Abaddon, the destroyer, English, Saddam in Persian. Write that down. And in the day in which it is fulfilled, somebody's going to see it, and the Spirit of God is going to reveal it, and people will know. So that's just one. There are several other key words like that that are astounding. And as I say, I could be wrong, but this is too coincidental to overlook.